Alcatraz Island, a small, windswept rock in the middle of San Francisco Bay, is shrouded in fog and mystery. Its rugged cliffs, surrounded by frigid, turbulent waters, have long given it an air of isolation and danger. For centuries, this forbidding island was seen as a place to be avoided, but in the 20th century, it became the home of America's most notorious prison, a place where the most dangerous and incorrigible criminals were sent, never to return to society. The history of Alcatraz as a prison began in the 1850s, when the U.S. military recognized its strategic importance. Initially, it was fortified as a military stronghold, intended to protect San Francisco Bay from invaders. However, its natural isolation soon made it an ideal location for a military prison. By the late 19th century, the island housed prisoners of war, deserters, and those who threatened military discipline. The harsh conditions of the island, combined with its remote location, made it the perfect place to incarcerate those deemed beyond redemption. But it was during the 1930s that Alcatraz would gain its reputation as the most feared prison in America. In the midst of the Great Depression, with crime on the rise and prohibition fueling the growth of organized crime, the federal government sought a solution for dealing with the most notorious criminals of the era. Men like Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly, and Alvin Creepy Karpis were wreaking havoc across the country, their power unchecked even from behind bars. Traditional prisons were unable to contain these men, who continued to influence the criminal underworld even while incarcerated. Alcatraz was the government's answer to this problem. In 1934, it was transformed into a maximum security federal penitentiary, designed to break the will of the most hardened criminals. The island's isolation was its greatest asset. Surrounded by freezing, shark-infested waters, escape seemed impossible. Prison itself was a fortress with thick concrete walls, iron bars, and vigilant guards. The message was clear. Alcatraz was where hope went to die. Life on Alcatraz was bleak. The prison was designed to deprive inmates of any comfort or privilege. Cells were small and bare, with only the most basic amenities. Inmates were subjected to a strict routine, with little time for recreation or socialization. The food was simple and often unappetizing, designed to sustain life but offer no pleasure. Prison's philosophy was one of total control. Every aspect of an inmate's life was monitored, and any infraction was met with swift punishment. Despite these harsh conditions, or perhaps because of them, Alcatraz became a place of legend. The stories that emerged from the island, brutal punishments, daring escapes, and the notorious criminals who called it home, captivated the public imagination. But beneath the surface of these stories lay a deeper, more troubling reality. Alcatraz was not just a prison. It was a place where men were pushed to the brink of insanity, where the line between punishment and cruelty was often blurred. As the years passed, Alcatraz became a symbol of the darkest aspects of the American justice system, a place where the most dangerous men were sent to be forgotten. Even in this desolate environment, the human spirit found ways to resist and survive. The island's history is filled with stories of defiance, ingenuity, and in some cases, escape. As the reputation of Alcatraz grew, so did the profiles of the men who were sent there. The island became home to some of the most infamous criminals in American history, each with their own story of crime, punishment, and, in some cases, redemption. These men were not just prisoners, they were legends in their own right, and their stories only added to the mystique, the Rock. One of the most notorious inmates was Al Capone, the infamous Chicago mob boss whose criminal empire had made him one of the most powerful men in America during the Prohibition era. Capone was known for his ruthlessness, his charisma, and his ability to elude law enforcement. Despite numerous attempts to bring him to justice, it was ultimately tax evasion that led to his downfall. In 1934, Capone was transferred to Alcatraz, where his life of luxury and influence came to a sudden, harsh end. At Alcatraz, Capone found himself in a world completely different from the one he had controlled with an iron fist. Here, he was just another inmate, stripped of his power and status. Prison's strict rules and isolation took a toll on him, both physically and mentally. Capone, once feared by all who knew him, became a shadow of his former self. He suffered from syphilis, which had begun to ravage his mind, and his mental health deteriorated rapidly. By the time he was released from Alcatraz in 1939, Capone was a broken man, far removed from the feared mobster he once was. Another infamous figure who called Alcatraz home was George "Machine Gun" Kelly, a notorious gangster and bootlegger. Kelly was known for his violent temper and his skill with the Thompson submachine gun, which earned him his nickname. He was involved in numerous crimes, including the kidnapping of oil tycoon Charles Urschel, which ultimately led to his capture. In 1933, Kelly was sentenced to life in prison, and he was soon transferred to Alcatraz. Kelly's time on the island was marked by his attempts to maintain his tough guy persona, but the harsh conditions of Alcatraz wore him down. Despite his reputation, Kelly became known among the guards and other inmates as a model prisoner, a far cry from the dangerous criminal he had once been. His time on Alcatraz was uneventful compared to others, and he eventually faded into obscurity. Kelly's story is a reminder of how even the most hardened criminals could be subdued by the relentless environment of Alcatraz. But not all inmates were content to serve their sentences quietly. The island's most famous escape attempt occurred in 1962, and it remains one of the greatest mysteries in the history of American prisons. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, were determined to break free from the confines of Alcatraz. Their plan was as daring as it was ingenious. For months, the three men worked in secret, using makeshift tools to dig through the concrete walls of their cells. They fashioned dummy heads out of plaster, paint, and real human hair, which they placed in their beds to fool the guards during night checks. The trio then climbed through the holes they had created, made their way to a utility corridor, and eventually reached the roof. From there, they descended to the ground and launched a makeshift raft into the treacherous waters of San Francisco Bay. When guards discovered the empty cells the next morning, a massive manhunt ensued. Despite exhaustive searches, the men were never found. Whether they drowned in the bay or managed to reach freedom remains a topic of debate to this day. The escape was a severe embarrassment for the prison and contributed to its eventual closure. The story of Morris and the Anglin brothers has since become a legend, immortalized in books, movies, and documentaries. Beyond the notorious inmates, Alcatraz was also home to countless other men whose stories are less well known but no less tragic. The island's harsh environment had a profound impact on the mental health of many prisoners. Some succumbed to despair, while others lashed out in violence. The isolation and strict regimen pushed some to the brink of madness, leading to acts of desperation. Inmates who violated the rules were often sent to the hole, dark, damp solitary confinement cell, where they were left alone with their thoughts for days, weeks, or even months. One such inmate was Robert Stroud, known as the Birdman of Alcatraz. Stroud was already a convicted murderer when he arrived at Alcatraz, but it was his obsession with birds that would make him famous. During his time in solitary confinement, Stroud began studying birds and even wrote several books on the subject, becoming an expert ornithologist despite his lack of formal education. However, Stroud was not the gentle, misunderstood figure that popular culture often portrays. He was a violent and dangerous man, and his time at Alcatraz was marked by numerous disciplinary issues. Stroud's story is a complex one, blending intelligence and brutality, and it highlights the paradoxes that defined life on Alcatraz. As the years went by, prison's brutal conditions and the increasing awareness of human rights issues began to draw criticism. The island's isolation, once seen as its greatest strength, became a liability. The cost of maintaining the facility, combined with the deteriorating infrastructure, made Alcatraz increasingly unsustainable. In 1963, the decision was made to close the prison, and the last inmates were transferred off the island. But Alcatraz's story did not end there. The island would go on to play a significant role in the history of civil rights in America. The Native American occupation of Alcatraz, from 1969 to 1971, was a watershed moment in the fight for indigenous rights. Activists from various tribes across the country claimed the island as a symbol of their struggle against the U.S. government's broken treaties and systemic oppression. The occupation brought national attention to the plight of Native Americans and laid the groundwork for future activism. The occupation also marked the beginning of of Alcatraz's transformation from a place of punishment to a place of reflection and learning. After the activists were removed, the island was designated as a National Historic Site, and it was opened to the public in 1973. Visitors now flock to the island, not just to see the prison, but to learn about its complex history, its role in the American justice system, and the broader social issues it has come to represent. The closure of Alcatraz in 1963 marked the end of an era, but the island's story was far from over. In the years that followed, Alcatraz would evolve from a symbol of America's harsh penal system into a place of profound historical and cultural significance. The transformation of Alcatraz into a National Historic Site allowed the stories of the men who lived and died there to be preserved, but it also opened the door to new narratives, ones that spoke to the broader struggles for justice and human rights in America. After the prison closed, Alcatraz sat abandoned for several years, its empty cells and crumbling buildings serving as a stark reminder of the island's dark past. But in November 1969, a group of Native American activists saw an opportunity to reclaim the island for their own cause. Calling themselves the Indians of all tribes, they occupied Alcatraz, demanding that the U.S. government return the land to the indigenous people from whom it had been taken. The occupation of Alcatraz was a turning point in the American Indian movement, a period of heightened activism for Native American rights. The activists, led by Richard Oakes and others, issued a proclamation declaring the island as Indian land and offering to buy it for the same price that white settlers had paid for Manhattan Island centuries earlier, $24 in glass beads and red cloth. This symbolic gesture was a powerful statement about the historical injustices faced by Native Americans and the need for recognition and restitution. During the 19-month occupation, the activists established a community on the island, complete with a school, health clinic, and cultural center. They received widespread support from across the country, and their cause drew national attention to the issues facing Native Americans, including poverty, lack of education, and the erosion of their cultural identity. The occupation also highlighted the broken promises and unfulfilled treaties that had defined the relationship between the U.S. government and Native American tribes for centuries. Despite the occupation's initial success, it eventually began to falter. The harsh conditions of the island, combined with internal divisions among the activists, made it difficult to sustain the community. In June 1971, after months of negotiations and dwindling support, federal marshals removed the last of the occupiers from Alcatraz. Although the occupation ended in disappointment, it left a lasting legacy. It sparked a resurgence of Native American activism and inspired future generations to continue the fight for indigenous rights. The occupation of Alcatraz also marked the beginning of the island's transformation into a site of public memory and education. In 1972, President Richard Nixon signed legislation designating Alcatraz as part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, ensuring its preservation as a historic site. The following year, the island was opened to the public, and it quickly became one of the most popular tourist destinations in the United States. Visitors to Alcatraz today are greeted by a complex and layered history. The guided tours and exhibits provide a glimpse into the harsh realities of life on the island, from the brutal conditions of the prison to the desperate escape attempts that have become the stuff of legend. The cells, solitary confinement chambers, and mess halls remain eerily intact, offering a window into the past that is both fascinating and unsettling. But beyond the prison walls, Alcatraz tells a broader story, a story of struggle, resilience, and change. The island's history is a microcosm of the larger forces that have shaped America, from the brutal realities of the penal system to the fight for civil rights and social justice. Preservation of Alcatraz as a historic site allows us to confront these difficult histories and learn from them. One of the most enduring aspects of Alcatraz's legacy is the way it has been reinterpreted and reimagined over time. For many, the island remains a symbol of punishment and confinement, a place where society's most dangerous men were sent to be forgotten. But for others, it represents something more complex, a place of resistance and survival, where the human spirit was tested, and in some cases, prevailed. The stories of the inmates who survived Alcatraz, and those who attempted to escape it, continue to captivate the public imagination. Films, books, and documentaries have kept these stories alive, each adding new layers to the island's mythology. The 1979 film Escape from Alcatraz, starring Clint Eastwood, dramatized the 1962 escape attempt and cemented the idea of Alcatraz as an inescapable fortress, a notion that only adds to the intrigue surrounding the island. But the reality of Alcatraz was far more complex than any Hollywood depiction. Prison was a place of extreme isolation and deprivation, where men were subjected to harsh conditions that often pushed them to the brink of madness. For some, like Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz, the isolation provided an opportunity for introspection and intellectual pursuit. For others, it was a descent into despair and violence. The mental toll of life on Alcatraz was immense. Inmates were cut off from the outside world, with limited contact with their families and virtually no chance of parole. The constant surveillance, the monotony of prison life, and the ever-present threat of punishment created an environment of fear and anxiety. Some inmates developed severe psychological problems, leading to self-harm, suicide, or violent outbursts. The prison's medical facilities were inadequate to deal with these issues, and many prisoners suffered in silence. Yet, despite the brutal conditions, there were moments of humanity on Alcatraz. Inmates formed friendships, found ways to pass the time, and even engaged in acts of creativity. The prison library was a refuge for many, offering books that allowed inmates to escape, if only temporarily, from their grim surroundings. Some prisoners took up hobbies like painting or writing, while others participated in the limited recreational activities available. The stories of survival on Alcatraz are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the odds, some inmates managed to find hope in the most hopeless of places. These stories, though less well known than the tales of violence and escape, are an essential part of the island's history. As Alcatraz continued to evolve as a historic site, its role in the public consciousness began to shift. What was once a place of fear and punishment became a place of reflection and education. The island's history, once dominated by tales of crime and incarceration, began to encompass the broader themes of justice, human rights, and the complexities of American history. As Alcatraz became more ingrained in American culture and consciousness, one of the most captivating aspects of its history continued to be the stories of escape attempts. Bold, desperate bids for freedom that captured the public's imagination. Despite the prison's reputation as the Rock, a fortress surrounded by treacherous waters and unforgiving currents, a number of inmates dared to challenge its inescapability. These stories, filled with ingenuity, courage, and desperation, remain some of the most compelling chapters in the history of Alcatraz. The 1946 Battle of Alcatraz, one of the most infamous escape attempts in the prison's history, occurred in May 1946, in what would become known as the Battle of Alcatraz. This violent episode unfolded when 6 prisoners, led by Bernard Coy, a bank robber with a reputation as a model prisoner, devised an intricate plan to overpower the guards and take control of the prison. Coy had spent months studying the routines and security measures at Alcatraz, meticulously planning what he believed would be a foolproof escape. Plan began on May 2, 1946, when Coy and his accomplices overpowered a guard in the cell house and managed to seize control of the weapons in the gun gallery. The inmates then attempted to take hostages, believing that they could negotiate their way off the island. However, their plan quickly unraveled when they were unable to find the key to the yard door, which would have allowed them access to the island's dock and a possible means of escape. What followed was a 2-day standoff, during which the prisoners exchanged gunfire with the guards and military personnel who had been called in to quell the uprising. The sounds of gunfire and explosions echoed across San Francisco Bay. The standoff continued, drawing widespread attention to the unfolding crisis. In the end, the rebellion was crushed, and 3 of the inmates, including Coy, killed in the battle. The surviving conspirators were later tried, and 2 of them were executed for their roles in the uprising. The Battle of Alcatraz became a defining moment in the prison's history, highlighting both the extreme measures some inmates were willing to take to escape and the brutal reality of life within its walls. The failed escape attempt reinforced the prison's reputation as a place from which there was no return, and the violent outcome served as a stark reminder of the lengths to which the authorities would go to maintain control. The 1962 escape, perhaps the most famous escape attempt from Alcatraz, and one that continues to fascinate historians and the public alike, occurred in June 1962. This daring escape, which involved 3 inmates, Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin, has become the stuff of legend, largely because of the enduring mystery surrounding their fate. Morris, who was known for his intelligence and resourcefulness, along with the Anglin brothers, who were experienced bank robbers, meticulously planned their escape over the course of several months. The trio devised an ingenious plan that involved creating makeshift tools, such as a drill made from a vacuum cleaner motor, to enlarge the ventilation ducts in their cells. They also crafted lifelike dummy heads out of soap, toilet paper, and human hair to place in their beds, fooling the guards during nighttime bed checks. On the night of June 11, 1962, the 3 men slipped through the enlarged ducts and climbed up to the roof of the cell house. From there, they made their way to the shoreline and set off into the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay on a makeshift raft constructed from raincoats. Despite an exhaustive search by the authorities, no trace of the men was ever found, leading to widespread speculation about whether they had perished in the bay or managed to reach the mainland and disappear. The 1962 escape has become a focal point of Alcatraz's legend, inspiring books, films, and documentaries. The possibility that the men might have survived adds an element of intrigue to the story, and over the years, there have been numerous reports and alleged sightings of the escapees. However, none of these claims have been conclusively proven, and the case remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. Other notable escape attempts. While the 1946 Battle of Alcatraz and the 1962 escape are the most famous, they were not the only attempts made by inmates to flee the island. In fact, during the 29 years that Alcatraz operated as a federal prison, there were a total of 14 escape attempts involving 36 inmates. Of these, 23 were recaptured, 6 were shot and killed during their attempts, 2 drowned, and 5 went missing and were presumed drowned. One notable escape attempt occurred in 1937, when Theodore Cole and Ralph Rowe managed to file through the iron bars of a window in the mat shop where they worked. The pair then climbed through a broken window, slipped down to the water's edge, and attempted to swim to freedom. Despite an extensive search, their bodies were never found, and they were presumed to have drowned in the strong currents of San Francisco Bay. In 1960, John Paul Scott became the only known inmate to successfully swim from Alcatraz to the mainland. However, his success was short-lived. After making the treacherous swim to the shore near Fort Point, Scott was found hypothermic and exhausted by local teenagers and was quickly recaptured. His escape attempt highlighted the near-impossible odds of successfully navigating the icy waters that surrounded the island. The analysis of escape attempts. The numerous escape attempts from Alcatraz provide a fascinating insight into the desperation and determination of the inmates. They also offer a glimpse into the ingenuity and resourcefulness that some prisoners employed in their bids for freedom. The varying degrees of success and failure highlight the harsh realities of life on Alcatraz and the extreme risks that inmates were willing to take to escape their confinement. Each escape attempt brought with it a heightened sense of paranoia and increased security measures within the prison. The authorities continuously reinforced the island's defenses, upgrading security systems and tightening restrictions on inmate movement. Despite these efforts, the escape attempts persisted, testament to the indomitable human spirit and the desire for freedom, even in the most oppressive conditions. The stories of these escape attempts contribute to the enduring mystique of Alcatraz. They add layers of suspense and intrigue to the island's history, capturing the imagination of those who visit the site today. The unresolved mysteries, particularly the fate of the 1962 escapees, continue to fuel speculation and fascination, keeping Alcatraz's legacy alive in the public consciousness. As we arrive into an end of Alcatraz's story, it's essential to reflect on how this isolated island in San Francisco Bay became a powerful symbol of both the darker aspects of the American justice system and the resilience of the human spirit. The prison's history is a microcosm of the broader struggles and contradictions inherent in the pursuit of justice, and its legacy continues to resonate in contemporary discussions about crime, punishment, and human rights. The numerous escape attempts from Alcatraz, particularly the 1962 escape of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, serve as enduring reminders of the lengths to which individuals will go to seek freedom, even in the most desperate circumstances. These stories, filled with suspense and mystery, captured the imagination of millions and have become a crucial part of the mythology surrounding the prison. But beyond the thrill of these escape narratives lies a deeper significance. The very fact that so many prisoners attempted to flee Alcatraz despite the nearly insurmountable odds speaks to the harshness of life on the island and the intense psychological and physical toll it took on its inhabitants. The prison's reputation as a place of extreme punishment, coupled with its inescapable nature, made it a symbol of the ultimate penal system, a place where society sent those it deemed irredeemable. However, the story of Alcatraz is not just about the prisoners who tried and often failed to escape. It is also about the broader societal forces that shaped the prison and the evolving views on incarceration. The island's transformation from a military fort to a maximum security prison and finally to a national park is a reflection of the changing attitudes toward crime and punishment in America. In its early years, Alcatraz was seen as a necessary tool for maintaining law and order during a time of increasing crime rates and social unrest. The federal government used the prison as a way to isolate the most dangerous criminals from society, believing that such extreme measures were justified to protect the public. However, as the years went on, public's perception of Alcatraz began to shift. The stories of the brutal conditions and the extreme isolation experienced by the inmates started to raise questions about the ethics of such a punitive system. The closure of Alcatraz in 1963 marked the beginning of a new chapter in the island's history, one that would see it transformed from a place of punishment to a site of memory and reflection. The decision to close the prison was driven by a combination of factors, including the high cost of maintaining the facility, deteriorating conditions, and the growing awareness of the need for prison reform. In the decades since its closure, Alcatraz has become a powerful symbol of both the failures and the potential for change within the American justice system. The island's history is now preserved as a national park, where visitors can explore the remains of the prison and learn about the complex and often troubling legacy of Alcatraz. Stories of the inmates, the escape attempts, and the harsh conditions serve as a reminder of the importance of fairness, humanity, and the ongoing struggle for justice. Alcatraz's legacy also continues to influence contemporary debates about the American penal system. Prison's history has been used as a cautionary tale in discussions about the ethics of solitary confinement, the treatment of prisoners with mental health issues, and the need for more humane approaches to incarceration. The lessons learned from Alcatraz have contributed to the broader movement for prison reform and the push for alternatives to the harsh and often dehumanizing conditions that define the prison's operation. Moreover, the mystery surrounding the fate of the 1962 escapees has kept the story of Alcatraz alive in popular culture, ensuring that the island's history remains relevant to new generations. Whether or not Morris and the Anglin brothers survived their daring escape, their story has become a symbol of the enduring human desire for freedom and the lengths to which people will go to achieve it. The story of Alcatraz is a story of extremes, of extreme punishment, extreme isolation, and extreme determination. It is a story that highlights the complexities and contradictions of the American justice system, and it serves as a powerful reminder of the need for ongoing reflection and reform. The prison's history, filled with suspense, mystery, and human drama, continues to captivate and inspire, offering valuable lessons for the present and future. As visitors walk through the cold, empty cells of Alcatraz today, they are not just exploring a relic of the past. They are engaging with a living history, one that challenges them to think critically about justice, fairness, and humanity. The island's transformation from a place of despair to a site of learning and reflection is a testament to the power of memory and the importance of preserving the past, not just as a way to understand where we have been, but as a guide for where we must go. In the end, Alcatraz stands as a symbol of the enduring struggle for justice, a struggle that continues to this day. The rise and fall of America's most infamous prison is a story that will never be forgotten. A story that reminds us of the importance of striving for a more just and humane society.